Chapter 3. Haugen lay high up in the hills on the west side of the valley. This moonlit night the whole world was white. Billow after billow, the white fells lay domed under the pale blue heavens, with their thin strewn stars. Even the shadows that peaks and domes stretched forth over the snow slopes seemed strangely thin and light. The moon was sailing so high. Downward toward the valley the woods stood fleecy white with snow and rime. Round the white fields of crofts scrolled over with tiny huts and fences. But far down in the valley bottom the shadows thickened into darkness. Lady Ushild came out of the byre, shut the door after her, and stood a while in the snow. White, the whole world. Yet it was more than 3 weeks still to Advent. Clement's Mass cold. 'Twas like winter had come in earnest already. Aye, in bad years it was often so. The old woman sighed heavily in the desolate air. Winter again, and cold, and loneliness. Then she took up the milk pail and went toward the dwelling house. She looked once again down the valley. 4 black dots came out of the woods halfway up the hillside. 4 men on horseback, and the moonlight glanced upon a spearhead. They were ploughing heavily upward. None had come that way since the snowfall. Were they coming hither? 4 armed men. 'Twas not like that any who had a lawful errand here would come so many in company. She thought of the chest with her goods and Bjorn's in it. Should she hide in the outhouse? She looked out again, over the wintry waste about her. Then she went into the living house. The 2 old hounds that lay before the smoky fireplace smote the floorboards with their tails. The young dogs Bjorn had with him in the hills. Ushild blew the embers of the fire into flame and laid more wood on them, filled the iron pot with snow and set it on the fire, then poured the milk into a wooden bowl and bore it to the closet beside the outer room. Then she doffed her dirty, undyed wadmal gown that smelt of the byre and of sweat, put on a dark blue garment, and changed her towel linen hood for a coif of fine white linen, which she smoothed down fairly around her head and neck. Her shaggy boots of skin she drew off and put on silver-buckled shoes. Then she fell to setting her room in order, smoothed the pillows and the skin in the bed where Bjorn had lain that day, wiped the long board clean, and laid the bench cushions straight. When the dogs set up their warning barking, she was standing by the fireplace, stirring the supper porridge. She heard horses in the yard and the tread of men in the outer room. Someone knocked on the door with a spear butt. Lady Ushild lifted the pot from the fire, settled her dress about her, and with the dogs at her side went forward to the door and opened it. Out in the moonlit yard were 3 young men holding 4 horses white with rime. A man that stood before her in the porch cried out joyfully, "Master Ushild, come you yourself to open to us? Nay, then must I say, bien trouvé. Sister's son, is it you indeed? Then the same I must say to you. Go into the room while I show your men the stable." "Are you all alone on the farm?" asked Erland. He followed her while she showed the men where to go. "Aye, Sir Bjorn and our man are gone into the hills with the sleigh. They are here to see and bring home some fodder we have stacked up there. said Lady Arshild. "And serving women have I none," she said, laughing. A little while after, the 4 young men were sitting on the outer bench with their backs to the board, looking at the old lady as, busily but quietly, she went about making ready for their supper. She laid a cloth on the board and set on it a lighted candle, then brought forth butter, cheese, a bare ham, and a high pile of thin slices of fine bread. She fetched ale and mead up from the cellar below the room, and then poured out the porridge into a dish of fine wood, and bade them sit into the board and fall to. "'Tis but little for you young folk," she said, laughing. "I must boil another pot of porridge. Tomorrow you shall fare better, but I shut up the kitchen-house in the winter, save when I bake or brew. We are few folks on the farm, and I begin to grow old, kinsman." Erland laughed and shook his head. He had marked that his men behaved before the old woman seemly and modestly, as he had scarce ever seen them bear themselves before. "You are a strange woman, master. Mother was 10 years younger than you, and she looked older when last we were in your house than you look to-day." "Aye, Munhild's youth left her full early," said Lady Arshild softly. "Where are you come from now?" she asked after a while. "I have been for a season at a farmstead up north in Leisure," said Erland. "I had hired me lodging there. I know not if you can guess what errand has brought me to this countryside." "What you're really asking is, do I know that you have made suit to Lavransdatter of Jorungard for his daughter?" "Aye," said Erland. "I made suit for her in seemly and honourable wise, and Lavransdatter answered with a churlish no. Now I see no better way, since Kristin and I will not be forced apart, than that I bear her off by the strong hand. I have had a spy in this countryside, and I know that her mother was to be at Sundbu at Clementsmas for a while after, and Lavrans is gone to Romsdal with the other men to fetch across the winter stores to Sill." Lady Arshild sat silent a while. "That counsel, Erland, you had best let be," said she. "I don't think that the maid will go with you willingly, and I hope you would not use force." "Aye, but she will. We have spoken of it many times. She has prayed me herself many times to bear her away." "Kristin has," said Lady Arshild. Then she laughed. "None the less, I wouldn't be too sure that the maid will follow." "Aye, but she will," said Erland. "And, master, my thought was this, that you sent word to Jorungard and bid Kristin come and be your guest, a week or so while her father and mother are from home. Then we could be at Hamar before any knew she was gone," he added. Lady Arshild answered, still smiling. "And had you thought as well what we should answer, Sir Bjorn and I, when Lavran comes and calls us to account for his daughter?" "Sure," said Erland. "We were 4 well-armed men, and the maid was willing." "I will not help you in this," said the lady hotly. "Lavrans has been a trusty man to us for many a year. He and his wife are honourable folk, and I will not be a part in deceiving them or beshaming their child. Leave the maid in peace, Erland. 'Twill soon be high time, son, that your kin should hear of other deeds of yours than running in and out of the land with stolen women." "I must speak with you alone, lady," said Erland shortly. Lady Arshild took a candle, led him to the closet, and shut the door behind them. She sat herself down on a corn bin. Erland stood with his hand thrust into his belt, looking down at her. "You may say this, too, to Lavransdatter, that Sire John of Gerderud joined us in wedlock ere we went on our way to Lady Ingeborg Hakansdatter in Sweden." "Do you say so?" said Lady Arshild. "Are you well assured that Lady Ingeborg will welcome you when you are come thither?" "I spoke with her at Tunsberg," said Erland. She greeted me as her dear kinsman, and thanked me when I proffered her my service, either here or in Sweden. And Munin hath promised me letters to her. And do you know, said Arshild, that even should you find a priest that will wed you, Kristin will have cast away all right to the heritage of her father's lands and goods, nor can her children be your lawful heirs. And I doubt much she will be counted as your lawfully wedded wife. Not in this land, maybe, and that's why we fly to Sweden. Her forefather, Laurentius Lagmard, was never wed to the Lady Bengta in any sort. They could never win her brother's consent, yet she was counted as a wedded lady. There were no children, said Lady Arshild. Do you think my sons will hold their hands from your heritage, if Kristin be left a widow with children, and their lawful birth can be cast in dispute? You do Munin wrong, said Erland. I know but little of your other children. I know indeed that you have little cause to judge them kindly, but Munin has ever been my trusty kinsman. He is fain to have me wed. 'Twas he went to Lavrans with my wooing. Besides, afterwards, by course of law, I can assure our children their heritage and rights. Ay, and thereby mark their mother as your concubine, said Lady Arshild. But 'tis past my understanding how that meek and holy man John Helgason will dare to brave his bishop by wedding you against the law. I confessed all to him last summer, said Erland in a low voice. He promised then to wed us, if all other ways should fail. Is it even so? Said Lady Arshild slowly. A heavy sin have you laid upon your soul, Erland Nicolason. 'Twas well with Kristin at home with her father and mother. A good marriage was agreed for her with a comely and honourable man of good kindred. Kristin had told me herself how you said once that she and I would match well together, and that Simon Anderson was no husband for her. Oh, I have said, and I have said, Arshild broke in. I have said so many things in my time. Neither can I understand at all how you have gained your will with Kristin so lightly. So many times you cannot have met together, and never could I have thought that maid had been so light to win. We met at Oslo, said Erland. Afterward she was dwelling out at Gerderud with her father's brother. She came out and met me in the woods. He looked down and spoke very low. I had her alone to myself out there. Lady Arshild started up. Erland bent his head yet lower. And after that she was still friends with you? She asked unbelievingly. Aye. Erland smiled a weak, wavering smile. We were friends still, and 'twas not so bitterly against her. But no blame lies on her. 'Twas then she would have had me take her away. She was loath to go back to her kin. But you would not? No. I was minded to try and win her for my wife with her father's will. How long ago was that? Asked Lady Arshild. 'Twas a year since Lawrence Mass, answered Erland. You have not hastened over much with your wooing, said the other. She was not free before from her first betrothal. And since then you have not come nigh her? Asked Arshild. We managed it so that we met once and again. Once more the wavering smile flitted over the man's face. In a house in the town. In God's name, said Lady Arshild. I will help you and her as best I may. I can see it well. Not long could Kristin bear to live there with her father and mother hiding such a thing as this. Is there more? She asked of a sudden. Not that I have heard, said Erland shortly. Did you think, asked the lady in a while, that Kristin has friends and kinsmen dwelling all down the dale? We must journey as secretly as we can, said Erland. and therefore it behoves us to make no delay in setting out, that we may be well on the way before her father comes home. You must lend us your sleigh, master." Arshild shrugged her shoulders. "Then there is their uncle at Skog. What if he hear that you are holding your wedding with your brother's daughter at Gerderud?" "Asmund has spoken for me to Lavrans," said Erland. "He would not be privy to our counsel, but 'tis like he will wink an eye. We must come to the priest by night and journey onward by night. And afterwards, I think well, Asmund will put it to Lavrans that it befits not a God-fearing man like him to part them that a priest has wedded, and that it will be best for him to give his consent, that we may be lawful wedded man and wife. And you must say the like to him, master. He may set what terms he will for atonement between us, and ask all such amends as he deems just." "I think Lavrans Bjorgulfsson will be no easy man to guide in this matter," said Lady Arshild. "And God and St. Olaf know, sister's son, I like this business but ill. But I see well 'tis the last way left you to make good the harm you have wrought, Kristin. Tomorrow will I ride myself to Jorungard, if so be you will lend me one of your men, and I get Ingrid of the croft above us here to see to my cattle." Lady Arshild came to Jorungard next evening, just as the moonlight was struggling with the last gleams of day. She saw how pale and hollow-cheeked Kristin was when the girl came out into the courtyard to meet her guest. The lady sat by the fireplace playing with the two children. Now and then she stole keen glances at Kristin as she went about and set the supper board. Thin she was truly, and still in her bearing. She had ever been still, but it was a stillness of another kind that was on the girl now. Lady Arshild guessed at all the straining and the stubborn defiance that lay behind. "'Tis like you have heard," said Kristin, coming over to her. "What befell here last autumn?" "Aye, that my sister's son has made suit for you." "Do you remember," asked Kristin, "how you said once he and I would match well together, only that he was too rich and great of kin for me?" "I hear that Lavrans is of another mind," said the lady dryly. There was a gleam in Kristin's eyes, and she smiled a little. "She will do, no question," thought Lady Arshild. Little as she liked it, she must hearken to Erland and give the helping hand he had asked. Kristin made ready her parents' bed for the guest, and Lady Arshild asked that the girl should sleep with her. After they had lain down and the house was silent, Lady Arshild brought forth her errand. She grew strangely heavy at heart as she saw that this child seemed to think not at all on the sorrow she would bring on her father and mother. "Yet I lived with Bard for more than 20 years in sorrow and torment," she thought. "Well, maybe 'tis so with all of us." It seemed Kristin had not even seen how Ulvhild had fallen away this autumn. "'Tis little like," thought Arshild, "that she will see her little sister any more." But she said naught of this. The longer Kristin could hold to this mood of wild and reckless gladness, the better it would be, no doubt. Kristin rose up in the dark and gathered together her ornaments in a little box which she took with her into the bed. Then Lady Arshild could not keep herself from saying, "Yet methinks, Kristin, the best way of all would be that Erland ride hither when your father comes home, that he confess openly he hath done you a great wrong, and put himself in Lavrans' hands." "I think, then, that father would kill Erland," said Kristin. "Lavrans would not do that, if Erland refused to draw steel against his love's father." "I have no mind that Erland should be humbled in such wise," said Kristin, "and I would rather that father didn't know that Erland had touched me before he asked for me in seemliness and honour." "Do you think Lavrans will be less angry?" asked Arshild, "when he hears that you have fled from his house with Erland? And think you 'twill be a lighter sorrow for him to bear? So long as you live with Erland, and your father has not given you to him, you can be nothing but his paramour before the law." "'Tis another thing," said Kristin, "if I be Erland's paramour after he has tried in vain to win me for his lawful wife." Lady Arshild was silent. She thought of her meeting with Lavrans Bjorgelsen when he came home and learnt that his daughter had been stolen away. Then Kristin said, "I see well, Lady Arshild, I seem to you an evil, thankless child. But so has it been in this house ever since father came from the Haugathing, that every day has been a torment to him and to me. 'Tis best for all that there be an end of this matter." They rode from Jorengard the next day, and came to Haugen a little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Erland met them in the courtyard, and Kristin threw herself into his arms, paying no heed to the man who was with her and Lady Arshild. In the house she greeted Bjorn Gunnarsson, and then greeted Erland's 2 men, as though she knew them well already. Lady Arshild could see no sign in her of bashfulness or fear. And after, when they sat at the board, and Erland set forth his plan, Kristin put her word in with the others and gave counsel about the journey, that they should ride forth from Haugen next evening so late that they should come to the gorge when the moon was setting, and should pass in the dark through Sill to beyond Lopsgard, thence up along the Ottar stream to the bridge, and from thence along the west side of the Ottar and the Lagan over bypass through the waste as far as the horses could bear them. They must lie resting through the day at one of the empty spring saeters on the hillside there. "For till we are out of the Holodis country, there is ever fear that we may come upon folk that know me." "Have you thought of fodder for the horses?" said Arshild. "You cannot rob folk saeters in a year like this, even if so be there is fodder there. And you know, no one in all the dale has fodder to sell this year." "I have thought of that," answered Kristin. "You must lend us 3 days' food and fodder. 'Tis a reason the more why we must not journey in so strong a troop. Erland must send John back to Huseby. The year has been better on the Trondheim side, and surely some loads can be got across the hills before the Yuletide snows. There are some poor folk dwelling southward in the parish, Lady Arshild, that I would fain you should help with a gift of fodder from Erland and me." Bjorn set up an uncanny, mirthless horse laugh. Lady Arshild shook her head. But Erland's man Ulf lifted his keen, swarthy face and looked at Kristin with his bold smile. "At Huseby there is never abundance, Kristin Lavransdatter, neither in good years nor in bad. But maybe things will be changed when you come to be mistress there. By your speech a man would deem you are the housewife that Erland needs." Kristin nodded to the man calmly and went on. They must keep clear of the high road as far as might be, and she deemed it wasn't wise to take the way that led through Hamar. But Erland put in, Munin was there, and the letter to the Duchess they must have. Then Ulf must part from us at Fagerberg and ride to Sir Munin, while we hold on west of Mjøs and make our way by land and the by-roads through Hadeland down to Hakadal. Thence there goes a waste way south to Margretedal, I have heard my uncle say. 'Twere not wise for us to pass through Raumarik in these days, when a great wedding feast is toward at Differen," she said with a smile. Erland went round and laid his arm about her shoulders, and she leaned back to him, paying no heed to the others who sat by looking on. Lady Arshild said angrily, "No one would believe anything else other than that you are well used to running away." And again Sir Bjorn broke in with his hoarse laugh. In a little while Lady Arshild stood up to go to the kitchen house and see to the food. She had made up the kitchen fire so that Erland's men could sleep there at night. She bade Kristin go with her. "For I must be able to swear to Lavransdatter that you were never a moment alone together in my house," she said wrathfully. Kristin laughed and went with the lady. Soon after, Erland came strolling in after them, drew a stool forward to the hearth, and sat there hindering the women in their work. He caught hold of Kristin every time she came near him as she hurried about her work. At last he drew her down on his knee. "'Tis even as Olva's said, I think. You are the housewife I need." "Yes, yes," said Arshild with a vexed laugh. "She will serve your turn well enough. 'Tis she that stakes all in this adventure. You hazard hardly anything at all." "You speak truth," said Erland. "But I wot well I have shown I had the will to come to her by the right road. Be not so angry, Master Arshild." "I do well to be angry," said the lady. "Scarce have you set your house in order, but you must needs guide things, so that you have to run from it all again with a woman." "You must bear in mind, kinswoman, so hath it ever been, that 'twas not the worst men who fell into trouble for a woman's sake. All the sagas tell us that." "Oh, God help us all," said Arshild. Her face grew young and soft. "That tale I have heard before, Erland." She laid a hand on his head and gave his hair a little tug. At that moment Ulf Haldarsson tore open the door and shut it quickly behind him. "Here is come yet another guest, Erland. The one you are least fain to see, I think." "Is it Lavransdatter?" said Erland, starting up. "It would be much better if it was," said the man. "It is Eline Ormsdatter." The door was opened from without. The woman who came in thrust Ulf aside and came forward into the light. Kristin looked at Erland. At first he seemed to shrivel and shrink together. Then he drew himself up with a dark flush on his face. "In the devil's name, where have you come from? What do you want?" Lady Arshild stepped forward and spoke. "You must come with us into the hall, Eline Ormsdatter. So much manners at least we have in this house that we welcome not our guests in the kitchen." "I look not," Lady Arshild said the other, "to be welcomed as a guest by Erland's kinsfolk." "Have you asked from whence I came?" "I come from Huseby, as you might know. I bear you greetings from Orm and Margaret. They are well." Erland made no answer. "When I heard that you had had Gissur Arnfinsen raise money for you, and that you were for the south again," she went on, "I thought 'twas like you would bide a while this time with your kinsfolk in Gudbrandsdal. I knew that you had made suit for the daughter of a neighbour of theirs." She looked across at Kristin for the first time and met the girl's eyes. Kristin was very pale, but she looked calmly and keenly at the other. She was stony calm. She had known it from the moment she heard who was come. This was the thought she had been fleeing from always. This thought it was she had tried to smother under impatience, restlessness, and defiance. The whole time she had been striving not to think whether Erland had freed himself wholly and fully from his former paramour. Now she was overtaken. It was useless to struggle any more. But she begged not nor beseeched for herself. She saw that Eline Ormsdatter was fair. She was young no longer, but she was fair. Once she must have been very beautiful. She had thrown back her hood. Her head was as round as a ball and hard. The cheekbones stood out. But none the less it was plain to see, once she had been beautiful. Her coif covered but the back part of her head. While she was speaking, her hands kept smoothing the waving, bright gold front hair beneath the linen. Kristin had never seen a woman with such great eyes. They were dark brown, round and hard. But under the narrow coal-black eyebrows and the long lashes, they were strangely beautiful against her golden hair. The skin off her cheeks and lips was chafed and raw from her ride in the cold, but it could not spoil her much. She was too fair for that. The heavy riding dress covered up her form, but she bore herself in it as does only a woman most proud and secure in the glory of a fair body. She was scarce as tall as Kristin, but she held herself so well that she seemed yet taller than the slender, spare-limbed girl. "Hath she been with you at Huseby the whole time?" asked Kristin in a low voice. "I have not been at Huseby," said Erland curtly, flushing red again. "I have dwelt at Hesnaes the most of the summer." "Here now are the tidings I came to bring you, Erland," said Eline. "You need not any longer take shelter with your kinsfolk and try their hospitality, for that I am keeping your house. Since this autumn I have been a widow." Erland stood motionless. "It was not I that bade you come to Huseby last year to keep my house," said he with effort. "I heard that all things were going to waste there," said Eline. "I had so much kindness left for you from old days, Erland, that I thought I should lend a hand to help you, although God knows you have not dealt well with our children or with me." "For the children I have done what I could," said Erland, "and you know well 'twas for their sake I suffered you to live on at Huseby. But I don't think either they or you profited much by it," he added, smiling scornfully. "Gisser could guide things well enough without your help." "Aye, you have ever had such a mighty trust in Gisser," said Eline, laughing softly. "But now the thing is this, Erland. Now I am free, and if so you will, you can keep the promise now you made me once." Erland stood silent. "Do you remember," asked Eline, "the night I bore your son? You promised then that you would wed me when Sigurd died." Erland passed his hand up under his hair that hung damp with sweat. I remember," he said. "Will you keep that promise now?" asked Eline. "No," said Erland. Eline Ormsdatter looked across at Kristin, then smiled a little and nodded. Then she looked again at Erland. "It is 10 years since, Eline," said the man, "and since that time you and I have lived together year in, year out, like two damned souls in hell. But not only so, I think," said she with the same smile. "It is years and years since anything else has been," said Erland dully. "The children would be none the better off, and you know I can scarce bear to be in a room with you any more." He almost screamed. "I marked naught of that when you were at home in the summer," said Eline with a meaning smile. "Then we were not unfriends, always." "If you think that we were friends, have it as you will," said Erland wearily. "Will you stand here without end?" broke in Lady Arsild. She poured the porridge from the pot into 2 great wooden dishes and gave one to Kristin. The girl took it. "Bear it to the hall, and you, Ulf, take the other, and set them on the board. Supper we must have, whether it be so or so." Kristin and the man went out with the dishes. Lady Arsild said to the 2 others, "Come now, you two, what good does it do stand here barking at each other?" "'Tis best that Eline and I have our talk out together now," said Erland. Lady Arsild said no more, but went out and left them. In the hall Kristin had laid the table and fetched ale from the cellar. She sat on the outer bench, straight as a wand and calm of face, but she ate nothing. Nor had the others much stomach to their food either, neither Bjorn nor Erland's men. Only the man that had come with Eline and Bjorn's hired man ate greedily. Lady Arsild sat herself down and ate a little of the porridge. No one spoke a word. At length Eline Ormsdatter came in alone. Lady Arsild bade her sit between Kristin and herself. Eline sat down and ate a little. Now and again a gleam as of a hidden smile flitted across her face, and she stole a glance at Kristin. The fire on the hearth was almost burnt out. Erland sat by it on his stool, crouched together, his head down between his arms. Lady Arsild went to him and laid a hand on his shoulder. "God forgive you, Erland, that you have brought things to this pass." Erland turned up to her with a face besmeared with wretchedness. "She is with child," he said, and shut his eyes. Lady Arshild's face flamed up. She gripped his shoulder hard. "Which of them?" she asked, roughly and scornfully. "My child it is not," said Erland in the same dead voice. "But like enough you will not believe me. None will believe me." He sank together again. Lady Arsild sat down in front of him on the edge of the hearth. "Now must you try to play the man, Erland. 'Tis not so easy to believe you in this matter. Do you swear it is not yours?" Erland lifted his ravaged face. "As surely as I need God's mercy, as surely as I hope that God in heaven has comforted Mother for all she suffered here, I have not touched Eline since first I saw Kristin." He cried out the words so that Lady Arsild had to hush him. "Then I see not that this is so great a misfortune. You must find out who the father is and make it worth his while to wed her." "'Tis in my mind that it is Gissur Arnfinsen, my steward at Huseby," said Erland wearily. "We talked together last year, and since then, too, Sigurd's death has been looked for this long time past. He was willing to wed her when she was a widow, if I would give her a fitting portion." "Well?" said Lady Arsild. Erland went on. "She swears with great oaths she will have none of him. She will name me as the father, and if I swear I am not, think you any will believe anything but that I am forsworn?" "You must be able to turn her purpose," said Lady Arsild. "There is no other way now, but that you go home with her to Huseby no later than tomorrow. And there you must harden your heart and stand firm till you have this marriage fixed between your steward and Eline." "Aye," said Erland. Then he threw himself forward again and groaned aloud. "Can you not see? What will Kristin believe?" At night Erland lay in the kitchen house with the men. In the hall Kristin slept with Lady Arsild in the ladies' bed, and Eline Ormsdatter in the other bed that was there. Bjorn went out and lay down in the stable. The next morning Kristin went out with Lady Arsild to the byre. While the lady went to the kitchen to make ready the breakfast, Kristin bore the milk up to the hall. A candle stood burning on the table. Eline was sitting dressed on the edge of her bed. Kristin greeted her silently, then fetched a milk pan and poured the milk into it. "Will you give me a drink of milk?" asked Eline. Kristin took a wooden ladle, filled it, and handed it to the other. She drank eagerly, looking at Kristin over the rim of the cup. "So, you are that Kristin Lavransdatter that hath stolen from me Erland's love," she said as she gave back the ladle. "You should know best if there was any love to steal," said the girl. Eline bit her lip. "What will you do," she said, "if Erland one day grow weary of you and offer to wed you to his serving man? Will you do his will in that as well?" Kristin made no answer. Then the other laughed and said, "You do his will in all things now, I well believe. What do you think, Kristin? Shall we throw dice for our man, we two paramours of Erland Nikolausen?" When no answer came, she laughed again and said, "Are you so simple that you deny not you are his paramour?" "To you I care not to lie," said Kristin. 'Twould profit you but little if you did," answered Eline, still laughing. "Ha! I know the boy too well. He flew at you like a black cock, I think, the second time you were together. It's a great pity for you too, fair child that you are." Kristin's cheeks grew white. Sick with loathing, she said low, "I will not speak with you." "Think you he is like to deal with you better than with me?" went on Eline. Then Kristin answered sharply, "No blame will I ever cast on Erland, whatever he may do. I went astray of my own will, and I shall not whimper or wail if the path lead out onto the rocks." Eline was silent for a while. Then she said unsteadily, flushing red, "I was a maid too, when he came to me, Kristin, even though I had been wife in name to the old man for 7 years. But like enough you could never understand what the misery of that life was." Kristin began to tremble violently. Eline looked at her. Then from her travelling case that stood by her on the step of the bed, she took a little horn. She broke the seal that was on its mouth and said softly, "You are young and I am old, Kristin. I know well it won't do me any good to strive against you. Your time is now. Will you drink with me, Kristin?" Kristin did not move. Then the other raised the horn to her own lips, but Kristin marked that she did not drink. Eline said, "So much honour you sure can do me to drink to me, and promise you will not be a hard stepmother to my children." Kristin took the horn. At that moment Erland opened the door. He stood a moment looking from one to the other of the women. "What is this?" he asked. Kristin answered, and her voice was wild and piercing. "We are drinking to each other, we, your paramours." He gripped her wrist and took the horn from her. "Be still," he said harshly. "You shall not drink with her." "Why not?" cried Kristin as before. "She was as pure as I was when you tempted her." "That hath she said so often that I think she's come to believe it," said Erland. "Mind you, Eline, when you made me go to Sigurd with that tale, and he brought forth witness thee had caught you before with another man?" White with loathing, Kristin turned away. Eline had flushed darkly. Now she said defiantly, "Yet will it scarce bring leprosy on the girl if she drink with me?" Erland turned on Eline in wrath. Then of a sudden his face seemed to grow long and hard as stone, and he gasped with horror. "Jesus!" he said below his breath. He gripped Eline by the arm. "Drink to her, then," he said in a harsh and quivering voice. "Drink you first, then she shall drink to you." Eline wrenched herself away with a groan. She fled backwards through the room, the man after her. "Drink!" he said. He snatched the dagger from his belt and held it as he followed. "Drink out the drink you have brewed for Kristin." He seized Eline's arm again and dragged her to the table, then forced her head forward toward the horn. Eline shrieked once and buried her face on her arm. Erland released her and stood trembling. "The hell was mine with Sigurd," shrieked Eline. You promised, but you have been worst to me of all, Erland." Then came Kristin forward and grasped the horn. "One of us two must drink. Both of us you cannot keep." Erland wrenched the horn away and flung her from him so that she reeled and fell nearby Lady Arsild's bed. Again he pushed the horn against Eline Ormsdatter's mouth. With one knee on the bench, he stood by her side, and with a hand round her head tried to force the drink between her teeth. She reached out under his arm, snatched the dagger from the table, and struck hard at the man. The blow did but scratch his flesh through the clothes. Then she turned the point against her own breast, and the instant after sank sidelong down into his arms. Kristin rose and came to them. Erland was holding Eline. her head hanging back over his arm. The rattle came in her throat almost at once. Blood welled up and ran out of her mouth. She spat some of it out and said, "'Twas for you I meant that drink, for all the times you deceived me." "Bring Lady Arshild hither," said Erland in a low voice. Kristin stood immovable. "She is dying," said Erland as before. "Then she is better served than we," said Kristin. Erland looked at her. The despair in his eyes softened her. She left the room. "What is it?" asked Lady Arshild, when Kristin called her out from the kitchen. "We have killed Eline Ormsdatter," said Kristin. "She is dying." Lady Arshild set off running to the hall, but Eline breathed her last as the lady crossed the threshold. Lady Arshild had laid out the dead woman on the bench, wiped the blood from her face, and covered it with the linen of her coif. Erland stood leaning against the wall, behind the body. "You do know," said Lady Arshild, "that this was the worst thing that could happen." She had filled the fireplace with twigs and firewood. Now she thrust the horn into the midst of them and blew them into the blaze. "Can you trust your men?" asked the lady again. "Ulv and Haftor are trusty, methinks. Of John and the man with Eline I know but little." "You know, I think," said the lady. "Should it come out that Kristin and you were together here, and that you two were alone with her when she died, it would have been better for Kristin that you had let her drink of Eline's brew. And should there be talk of poison, all men will call to mind what was once laid to my charge. Did she have any kindred or friends?" "No," said Erland in a low voice. "She had no one but me." "Yet," said Lady Arshild again, "it will be a hard matter to cover up this thing and hide the body without the ugliest of misthought falling on you." "She shall rest in hallowed ground," said Erland, "if it cost me Husaby. What do you say, Kristin?" Kristin nodded. Lady Arshild was silent. The more she thought, the more hopeless it seemed to her to find any way out. In the kitchen house were 4 men. Even if Erland could bribe them all to keep silence, even if some of them, if Eline's man, could be bribed to leave the country, still they could never be sure. And 'twas known at Yorengard that Kristin had been here. If Lavrans heard of this, she feared to think what he would do. And how to bear the dead woman away? The mountain path to the west was not to be thought of now. There was the road to Romsdal, or over the hills to Trondheim, or south down the dale. And should the truth come out, it would never be believed, even if folk let it pass for true. "I must take counsel with Bjorn in this matter," she said, and rose and went out to call him. Bjorn Gunnarsson listened to his wife's story, without moving a muscle, and without withdrawing his eyes from Erland's face. "Bjorn," said Arshild desperately, "there is nothing for it but that one must swear he saw her lay hands upon herself." Bjorn's dead eyes grew slowly dark as life came into them. He looked at his wife, and his mouth drew aside into a crooked smile. "And you mean that I should be the one?" Lady Arshild crushed her hands together and lifted them towards him. "Bjorn, you know well what it means for these two." "And you think that whether or not 'tis all over with me?" he said slowly. "Or do you think there is so much left of the man I once was that I dare be forsworn to save that boy there from going down to ruin? I that was dragged down myself all those years ago? Dragged down, I say," he repeated. "You say it because I am old now," whispered Arshild. Kristin burst out into such weeping that the piercing sound filled the room. She had sat in the corner by Arshild's bed, stark and silent. Now she began weeping wildly and loud. It was as though Lady Arshild's voice had torn her heart open. The voice had been heavy with the memories of the sweetness of love. It was as though its sound had made her understand for the first time what her love and Erland's had been. The memory of hot and passionate happiness swept over all else, swept away the hard despair and hatred of last night. All she knew of now was her love and her will to hold out. They looked at her, all three. Then Sir Bjorn went across and lifted her chin with his hand and looked at her. "Do you say, Kristin, she did it herself?" "Every word you have heard is true," said Kristin firmly. "We threatened her till she did it." "She had meant Kristin should suffer a worse fate," said Arshild. Sir Bjorn let go the girl. He went over to the body, lifted it up into the bed where Eline had lain the night before, and laid it close to the wall, drawing up the coverings well over it. "John and the man you do not know you must send home to Huseby, with word that Eline is journeying south with you. Let them ride at midday. Say that the women are asleep in the hall. They must take their food in the kitchen. Afterward you must speak with Ulf and Haftor. Hath she threatened before to do this? So that you can bring witness to it if such a question should be asked. Every soul that was at Huseby the last years we lived together there," said Erland wearily, "can witness that she threatened to take her own life, and mine too sometimes, when I spoke of parting from her." Bjorn laughed harshly. "I thought as much. Tonight we must clothe her in her riding coats and set her in the sleigh. You must sit beside her." Erland swayed on his feet where he stood. "I cannot. God knows how much manhood will be left in you when you have gone your way 20 years more," said Bjorn. "Do you think then that you can drive the sleigh? For then I will sit beside her. We must travel by night and by lonely paths till we come down to Fron. In this cold no one can know how long she has been dead. We will drive into the monks' hospice at Rolstadt. There you and I will bear witness that you two were together in the sleigh and it came to bitter words between you. There is witness enough that you would not live with her since the ban was taken off you, and that you have made suit for a maiden of birth that fits your own. Ulf and Haftor must hold themselves aloof the whole way, so they can swear, if need be, she was alive when they last saw her. You can bring them to do this much, I guess. At the monastery you can have the monks lay her in her coffin, and afterward you must bargain with the priests for grave peace for her and soul's peace for yourself. Aye, a fair deed it is not, but so as you have guided things, no fairer can it be. Don't stand there like a breeding woman ready to swoon. God help you, boy. A man can see you have not proved before what it's like to feel the knife edge at your throat. A biting blast came rushing down from the mountains, driving a fine silvery smoke from the snow wreaths up into the moon-blue air as the men made ready to drive away. 2 horses were harnessed, one in front of the other. Erland sat in front of the sleigh. Kristin went up to him. "This time, Erland, you must try to send me word how this journey goes and what becomes of you after." He crushed her hand till she thought the blood must be driven out from under the nails. "Dare you still hold fast to me, Kristin?" "Ah, still," she said, and after a moment, "Of this deed we are both guilty. I egged you on, for I willed her death." Lady Arshild and Kristin stood and looked after the sleigh as it rose and dipped over the snowdrifts. It went down from sight into a hollow, then came forth again farther down on a snow slope, and then the men passed into the shadow of a fell and were gone from sight for good. The two women sat by the fireplace, their backs to the empty bed, from which Arshild had borne away all the bedding and straw. Both could feel it standing there, empty and gaping behind them. "Would you rather that we should sleep in the kitchen house tonight?" asked Lady Arshild at length. "'Tis like it will be the same wherever we lie," said Kristin. Lady Arshild went out to look at the weather. "Aye, should the wind get up or a thaw come on, they will not journey far before it comes out," said Kristin. "Here at Haugen it blows all the time," answered Lady Arshild. "There's no sign of a change in the weather." They sat on as before. "You should not forget," said the lady at last, "what fate she had meant for you two." Kristin answered low, "I was thinking maybe in her place I had wanted the same thing." "Never would you have willed that another should be a leper," said Arshild vehemently. "Mind you, Master, you said to me once that it is good when we dare not to do a thing we think is not good and fair, but not so well when we think a thing not good and fair because we dare not to do it. You had dared not to do it because it was sin," said Lady Arshild. "No, I don't believe so," said Kristin. "Much have I done already that I deemed once I dared not do because it was sin. But I saw not till now what sin brings with it, that we must tread others under foot. Erland would fain have made an end of his ill life long before he met you," said Arshild eagerly. "All was over between those two." "I know it," said Kristin, "but I guess she never had cause to think Erland's purposes so firm that she could not shake them." "Kristin," begged the lady fearfully, "surely you would not give up Erland now. You cannot be saved now except you save each other." "That's exactly what a priest would say," said Kristin, smiling coldly. "But I know well that I can never give up Erland now, not if I should tread my own father underfoot." Lady Arshild rose. "We might as well put our hands to some work as sit here thus," she said. "Like enough 'twould be vain for us to try to sleep." She fetched the butter churn from the closet, then bore in some pans of milk, filled the churn, and made ready to begin churning. "Let me do it," Kristin asked. "My back is younger." They worked without speaking. Kristin stood by the closet door, churning, while Arshild carded wool by the hearth. At last, when Kristin had emptied the churn and was kneading the butter, the girl asked of a sudden, "Master Arshild, are you never afraid of the day when you must stand before God's judgment?" Lady Arshild rose and came and stood before Kristin in the light. "It may be that I shall find courage to ask him that hath made me as I am, if he will have mercy on me in his own good time. For I have never begged for his mercy when I broke his commands. And never have I begged God or man to forgive me a farthing of the price I have paid here in this mountain hut." A little while after she said softly, "Munin, my eldest son, was 20 years old. He was not such an one then as I know he is now. They were not such ones then, my children." Kristin answered low, "But yet you have had Sir Bjorn by your side each day and each night in all these years." "Aye, that too have I had," said Arshild. In a little while after, Kristin was done with the butter-making. Lady Arshild said then that they must lie down and try to sleep a little. Inside, in the dark bed, she laid her arm round Kristin's shoulders and drew the young head into her breast. and it was not long before she heard by her even and gentle breathing that Kristin had fallen asleep.